Lick talker since a jet.
Winter time, all the time, ooh, yeah. Look at the way that I move, swag. Disrespectful and I'm rude, okay. I had cocaine in the school.
Hello everyone and welcome to the first part to What If Asta Was an Elf. Now this is a what if that was recommended to me by my admin in my Discord server, Aiden Offline. Once again, shout out to him. Now, what if Asta was Sasuke's reincarnation is being postponed so I can do this? But who knows, I might pull that out of nowhere and be running 2 Asta what ifs at the same time. Also, a little hint for my 1K special, we might be running 3 Asta what ifs at the same time if I hit 1K while these what ifs are still running, which I think I will. But yeah, I don't really have much else to say about this. Discord is linked in the description below and in the comments, as always. I hope you guys enjoy, and let's get into it. Okay, first off, I have to explain how Asta is going to be an elf, because that is the whole focus of this what if. Okay, we have to go a bit back when all the elves were slaughtered. Now, all the humans would attack the elves like in canon while they were being manipulated by Zagrid. And obviously the Wizard King Lumiere's sister was there, and this time she was not fatally injured. In fact, with the help of Licht and a few other elves, she was brought to refuge, and due to all of the panic and stress, she was thrown into labor. And she would give birth to hers and Licht's child. But much like in canon, Lumiere and Nero would show up and Lumiere would fight Licht, who had now become a giant demon. While Licht and Lumiere were fighting, Nero would be looking around for any surviving elves. But she would run across Lumiere's dead sister as she would be holding her newly born baby who was still crying. But she would see the baby had white hair and also pointy ears, meaning it resembled an elf, meaning she couldn't take it back to Lumiere's family because they would probably kill it. So she would take the child and run it to the closest commoner village. She would give Licht's child to some random woman and she would run off, making it back just in time to do what she did in canon. She would then be turned into a bird just like in canon. And Licht's child would be raised as a commoner in a commoner village. But despite this, he had more magical power than any royal. He could also perform sword magic like his father Licht and wind magic like his mother. But he did actually have light magic in his DNA. And there was actually a very good chance he could have wielded it over wind magic, but I have to let him use wind magic because, plot purposes. Now, if you're wondering why there's a possibility that he could have wielded light magic, that's because Tetia, Lumiere's sister, is, well, Lumiere's sister, and he has light magic, meaning it is also in her lineage. Meaning there was a large possibility that she could have inherited light magic just like her brother Lumiere, but she just didn't. But there's also the possibility that she can pass it down to her child and their children after them. It's not all that hard to understand. But Licht's child would grow up and have a child of his own, and his child would actually possess light magic. He would still possess his pointy ears and his white hair just like his grandfather Licht. Now this would continue going on for a couple of generations, until they made it down to Asta's father. Asta's father would have long white hair just like his great-great-something grandfather Licht, and due to the fact that Asta's ancestors have not been able to mate with any elf, they've only been mating with humans, their DNA has kind of been tainted, meaning they share the resemblance of a human, yet they're still full-on elves inside. They're still physically and magically superior than any human to walk the face of the earth. But then Asta's father would hit it and quit it with Asta's mother, Lysita, and Lysita would do what she did in canon and leave Asta at the church. Now Asta's appearance would pretty much stay the same, but he isn't going to be short in this what if, and he's also going to have white hair, just like Licht and all of his other ancestors. Asta would also be born with light magic and sword magic. And Asta was always a prodigy at everything. Within just the first couple of weeks of him being dropped off at the church, he was already able to walk, and just a month and a half later, he was able to talk. Also skip a few years till Asta is like 3 or 4. By this time, Asta is very intelligent. He already knows how to read and write very proficiently. He also knows how to manipulate his mana and use magic. And the first magic he manifests is his sword magic. And he can wield it with little to no difficulty because it kind of just comes naturally to him. Please excuse the annoying ass dog in the background, but the swords that Asta can create come in 3 variations. And Asta likes to call these 3 variations by names: the Demon Dweller Sword, the Demon Slayer Sword, and the Demon Destroyer Sword. They're pretty complex names for a 4-year-old, but they just seem right to Asta. As they're shown on screen here, they aren't actually like rusty like they are in canon. They have the appearance of when Licht uses them. They have the white blade and the clean golden hilt. shown here when Licht is holding them. The Demon Destroyer sword doesn't have a golden hilt, but the Demon Slayer and Demon Dweller sword does. And a 4-year-old Asta can't really do much with these swords since he can't even hold them. He can just barely pick up the Demon Destroyer sword because he's only 4 years old, even though he has enhanced strength because he's an elf. But just because he can't physically wield them, he can still summon as many swords as he wants. He can also manipulate all of these swords at once, meaning he can summon like 1,000 Demon Slayer swords and send them toward anyone. But 1 year later, when Asta and Yuno turned 5, Sister Lily showed up to the church. And in this what if, he's not attracted to her whatsoever. And also when Sister Lily tried to read to Asta and Yuno, Asta would usually set out and go to work around the church. But every once in a while, just for the hell of it, he would sit around and listen to her read. She would commonly read the book about the Wizard King, but Asta already knew all about the Wizard King from other books that he'd read. And in fact, in this what if, he's not really striving to become the Wizard King. Like I said, Asta is very intelligent, even for his age. So when thinking about the goal of being the Wizard King, something completely outlandish, Asta sees it all the way through. He looks at all the outcomes and how it will affect everything. And he completely understands that the Wizard King is a king for a reason. His authority is only second to the actual king. And with authority also comes responsibility, also comes tons of work. Since Asta has a pretty good grasp on how royalty works, he knows that the real king does not do any work. So all that work and responsibility that comes with the fact that your authority is only second to the king is left up to the Wizard King. He probably has to deal with all political and probably military stuff since he is the Wizard King and he is over all of the Magic Knights. So in Asta's head, in theory, the Wizard King is a pretty cool dream, but in the long run, it's not really all that good. Now, one day later in the year, when Asta was out pulling up pot potatoes out of the garden, the father came back and there was nobody at the church except for Yuno. So the father did what he did in canon and gave the letter to Yuno and sent him off. An hour would pass and Yuno was still not back and everyone was sitting inside the church at this point. It would begin to get dark and the snow would begin to fall even more, and this would begin to worry Asta as he would run outside the church and set off for the neighboring village to find Yuno. Asta would make it to the neighboring village as he would turn the corner and he would see Yuno get his pendant stolen and getting beat up by a drunk man. This would anger Asta as he would attempt to summon one of his swords and send it toward the drunk man. But instead of summoning one of his swords, he summoned a light orb. And on accident, he would send the light orb toward the drunk man as it would zip through the air, slamming into him, exploding on contact. Asta would be shocked because that was a second kind of magic that he didn't even know he had. But the drunk man would have dropped Yuno's pendant as soon as he was hit by the light orb, and Yuno would quickly grab it off the ground as he would run toward Asta being shocked as well. They would both make their way back to Hodge Village. From here I'm going to have an 8-year time skip until Asta and Yuno are 13 years old. By this time Yuno would want to become strong like Asta, so he would adapt to his regular personality like he did in canon. And now, Asta being 13, he could wield all of his swords, Demon Slayer, Demon Dweller, and Demon Destroyer. But when he was training his sword magic, he would commonly wield the Demon Destroyer and Demon Dweller, much like Licht. And he could do this with great proficiency as well. Despite him not having any sword training in his entire life, his swordsmanship was very refined and he was just all around really skilled with the sword. He also found out he could send out powerful slashes from all 3 of his swords. And one day when Asta was sparring with Yuno, he attempted to cut through one of Yuno's wind attacks with his Demon Dweller sword, but unintentionally absorbed the attack and multiplied it 10 times its original power. And Asta could feel Yuno's wind magic brimming through his Demon Dweller sword. It was like an open cannon just waiting to be released. Asta would then aim his Demon Dweller sword toward the forest nearby, and he would release it. It proceeded to wipe out half of the forest. And also within these 8 years, Asta picked up on his light magic and could wield it pretty proficiently, but he didn't commonly use it when sparring with Yuno because it was way too destructive. He could create weapons and objects out of light. He could also create light beams and light orbs. And also within this time skip, Asta would learn how to control his mana around him a bit more, and he would learn how to levitate and fly just like Licht. Now you can interpret this as a less advanced version of Mana Zone or not, it really does not matter. Sister Lily and the father, and yes, I forgot his name, but he's only going to be relevant for like this one part, but yeah, Sister Lily and the father would see how strong Yuno and Asta were, and they would recommend them to take the Magic Knight exams. So 2 years would pass, and Asta and Yuno would turn 15, and it would be the day of the Grimoire selection ceremony. Everyone from the church would make their way to the Grimoire Temple. Now, just like in canon, the same people would be here, and the nobles would be looking down and talking down on all the commoners. Then they ran across Yuno and Asta, who they knew were definitely commoners, yet they had the appearance of nobility or royalty. As then the Grimoire ceremony would commence. As suddenly tons of grimoires would fly from the shelves as they would begin to land in people's hands. This would go on for a minute or two until the ceremony was almost done, but suddenly, two bright lights would form at the top of the temple, as both lights would get together and they would begin to spiral down with each other toward the ground. As then the two grimoires would come between Asta and Yuno, as they would begin to spin around, one landing in Asta's hand and one landing in Yuno's hand. As the golden aura would clear, it would be revealed that it was two four-leaf grimoires. Yuno would get his regular four-leaf grimoire like he did in canon, and Asta would get a four-leaf grimoire that was golden and had white trimming around the edges. Yuno would declare his dream to become the Wizard King much like in canon, and Asta would simply smile at this as he would walk out of the temple. Many, if not all, of the commoners would be extremely surprised and amazed that two commoners, got four-leaf grimoires at the exact same time, while all of the nobles would be extremely jealous. After the ceremony, everyone would clear out of the temple, including Yuno. As Yuno was walking back to the church by himself, he would see someone in the distance as they would begin to approach him. Eventually, the two would meet and the man would take off his hood and he would say, "I'm gonna need that grimoire." As then chains would erupt from the ground, but then Yuno would say that's not gonna happen as he would send a giant wind tornado toward the chain mage. But this would be too no avail as chains would rip through the wind tornado and they would wrap around Yuno, capturing him. As the chain mage began to walk up to Yuno to try to take his grimoire, he would hear a voice behind him. The voice would say, "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The chain mage would turn around to see Asta as he would laugh and he would say, "I'm gonna need your grimoire as well." As he would then send chains toward Asta as well, but Asta would summon his demon dweller sword and with just simple swipes of his sword, he would send out air slashes that would cut through all of Revchi's chains. As then he would blitz forward toward Revchi. Revchi would then send more chains toward him as it would simply be cut through by Asta's demon dweller sword. But Asta would hop back as he would say, "I should finish this," and he would get a tad bit serious as he would aim his demon dweller sword at Revchi and as a light beam would begin to form at the tip. Asta would then fire the light beam as it would rip through and destroy all of Revchi's chains and hit him, sending him flying back into a wall unconscious. Asta and Yuno would share a fist bump as 6 months would go by. With these 6 months going by, Asta and Yuno would hone their skills and train as much as possible, because they were going to take the Magic Knight exams for 2 different reasons. Yuno wanted to become the Wizard King, and Asta was just blatantly bored. Well, it was more or less that Asta could acknowledge that his talents were being wasted at a church. But after these 6 months, Asta and Yuno would be standing in front of the church as they would be waving bye to everyone as they turned around and began to walk off. Asta and Yuno would be walking for a little bit before Asta would stop and tell Yuno that he had a better alternative. As then Asta's grimoire would begin to float in front of him as he would cast a spell. A huge light sphere would begin to form in front of him and Yuno, and he would tell Yuno to hang on to it before grabbing onto it himself. Once both of them had a firm grasp onto it, he would release the spell. As then Asta and Yuno would be sent flying into the air. As then they would travel miles and miles through the air, and they would actually be getting quite close to the kingdom. As then they were flying over the kingdom, but the light spear would begin to slow down as Asta and Yuno would begin to plummet to the ground. But Asta would manipulate the light spear at the last second, allowing it to slow down and put them safely on the ground. From here, Asta and Yuno would make their way and get in line where all the other participants were to take the Magic Knight exams. As then it would be their turn to get their grimoires checked. As then Yuno would get his checked first. As the mage checking the grimoires would be amazed as he would happily give Yuno his grimoire back and tell him where to go and his number. And then next there was Asta. And the mage checking the grimoires could not contain himself. He would yell out another 4-leaf clover, as all attention would be brought over to him and Asta, as people would begin to whisper around about how he had a 4-leaf clover. Most people would be surprised, even some nobles, but other nobles would be angry that some commoner got a 4-leaf clover grimoire. As then he would hand his grimoire back to Asta and he would tell him his number and where to go. As soon as Asta stepped into the arena, most of the birds flew away from that area. This would catch the attention of all the participants, as most people would see how handsome he was and wondered if he was nobility or even royalty. As then he would meet up with Yuno and they would begin to walk around and talk for a bit. And he would never have his encounter with Yami since he wasn't being attacked by all the birds. As a minute or two would pass and all of the captains would show up. And with this, all of the mana birds would fly away and Vengeance would begin to explain the exams. As in, much like in canon, he would use his world tree magic to create brooms and hand them to all of the participants. And he would tell them to start flying. Asta would look around because he's never actually had to use a broom to fly, but he wouldn't really question it if it was required, so he would throw it up into the air and jump onto the broomstick. He would plant both of his feet on the stick of the broom and he would begin to fly around standing up on the broomstick. And he would be doing this with ease, catching the attention of all the captains. He already had all their attentions from the start since he was practically flooding with mana without even using magic. And much like in canon, Yuno would also be flying around on a broom with little difficulty. Next would come the creation test. And with this, Asta's kind of forced to use his light magic. So with this, he would make a few swords and other weapons and even a few statues out of light. And this would pretty much seal the deal for all the captains. He had light magic, he had tons of mana, and he had good control over it. After this, the projectile test would come up. Asta would simply shoot a light beam at his projectile, destroying it immediately. And after this, the combat test would come. A few fights would go by, but no one had even approached Asta to be his partner because they seen what he did earlier with his magic. They also knew he had a four-leaf clover grimoire. But then suddenly, some cocky noble who could wield crystal magic would approach Asta, and he would challenge Asta to a fight. Asta and the noble would make their way to the middle of the arena, as William Vengeance would immediately start the fight with a smirk on his face, waiting to see what the boy could do. As then the noble would start off the fight by summoning his grimoire, and shooting some crystal shards toward Asta. Asta would think quickly, summoning his Demon Destroyer sword as he would cut through all the crystal shards with minor ease. Everyone in the arena would be confused except for Yuno because they knew he had light magic or some kind of bright magic, and this was not it. This was some kind of sword summoning magic. As then Asta's grimoire would fly from his grimoire holster as a golden aura would be enveloped around it. As then two light orbs would be summoned, one on his left and one on his right, and he would hold his hand out as another light orb would be summoned in his hand. As then Asta would say, "Illuminating Virgins," as beams of light would shoot from all three orbs as they would zip through the air, slamming into the noble's chest, exploding and knocking him back into a pillar. With the noble unconscious, Asta would be declared the winner. Yuno and everyone else would have their same fights as in canon, as then the selection would take place. All the people that got accepted in canon would also get accepted again, and much like in canon, all the captains would raise their hand for Yuno and he would go to the Golden Dawn. As then Asta would go next as they would all raise their hand for him as well. Now the only two squads that stood out to Asta were the Black Bulls and the Golden Dawn, and the Golden Dawn being full of snobby nobles and other people that were all high and mighty. And then you had the Black Bulls, a squad of misfits that basically got to do whatever they wanted and were pretty much free. And to the shock of everyone, including Yami himself, Asta would say that he wanted to go to the Black Bulls. This is mainly because Asta was kind of tired of getting praised all the time. So he knew if he joined the Golden Dawn, he was just going to get more praise, and he didn't really want that. And he knew the opposite was going to happen if he joined the Black Bulls, and he didn't want to steal all the spotlight away from Yuno and everyone else, so he just joined the Black Bulls. After the exams were done, Captain Yami, Asta, Gordon, and Fenrold all joined up, as Fenrold would open up a portal to the Black Bulls base. All of them would walk through as they approached the Black Bulls base as Yami opened the door, and all they seen was absolute chaos. Luck was running around on the walls, while Magma was hitting fireballs toward him. Mr. EDP himself, Ghosh, was looking at a picture of his sister. Yes, that is the second time I made this joke, but I made it like 10 months back, don't judge. Vanessa was passed out on the sofa, Charmy was eating, and Gray was just blowing smoke. Now from here, things would go directly to canon. Yami would yell to stop breaking things as he would break the wall himself. Everyone would come and sit in front of him as Magma would ask if he picked up a new rookie. Yami would say yes as he would tell Asta to introduce himself, and in a very enthusiastic voice, Asta would wave and say his name was Asta. And then Fenrold would introduce Asta to all the other squad members. Magma would do what he did in canon, trying to explain the baptism and how he had to gain his robe. But Asta would kind of just stand there looking at Magma like he was stupid. As then the baptism would commence and everyone would find themselves outside. Magma would then explain to Asta that all he had to do was survive his attack, as he would open up his grimoire and pull back his hand as a fireball would begin to summon in it. As then the fireball would power up more and more and Magma would launch it toward Asta. Asta wouldn't pull out his grimoire or anything, but he would point his finger at the fireball coming toward him, as a light orb would shoot from Asta's finger and it would collide with Magma's fireball. This would create a huge explosion as nothing would be left but smoke and a crater in the ground. Asta would wave his hand from a distance and he would ask if he passed. Magma, being amazed by his power, he would say hell yes. He threw him a Black Bull's robe. All the other Black Bulls would welcome Asta into the squad as he would be shown to his room by Magma. The very next day, Magma would be showing Asta around the Black Bull's hideout until they would be walking down the hallway and they would run across someone. This would be Noelle. Magma would explain that Noelle was also a new rookie. Noelle would say he shouldn't talk about her too casually since she was royalty, and then he would say that he was her superior and blah blah blah. This would lead to her getting pissed off and sending a water ball toward Magma, but it would curve and go toward Asta and he would simply step out of the way, dodging it. She would then get even more pissed off, throwing the robe on the ground and walking away. Noelle would go out into the woods to train, but she would lose control when having bad memories of her family and she would trap herself inside of her own water ball, as then it would begin to spiral out of control, much like in Canon, catching the attention of all the members. Everyone would meet up in front of the Black Bull's hideout as they would gaze upon the giant water ball. Yami would take a puff of his cigarette before saying in a lazy voice, "Can anyone handle that?" Asta would say, "I'll try something," as he would summon a demon dweller sword and he would leap off from the ground. He would be sent flying through the air before making it to the water bubble as he would stab the demon dweller sword into the water bubble, absorbing all the magic. As the water bubble began to disappear, Noelle began to fall. Asta would quickly grab her before pointing the demon dweller sword into the air and releasing the giant amount of water magic. And since it was multiplied 10 times its original amount and power, a giant beam of water would be shot out from the demon dweller sword as it could be seen from the capital. As then all the water would begin to fall down and it would feel as if it was raining. Asta would land back down onto the ground as he would set Noelle down. As she thought a flurry of insults were about to hit her, instead, it was all praise. Everyone would be saying how amazing and strong her magic was. Even Asta would say it was pretty cool how much magic she could output, even though he rarely ever gives out compliments to anyone. Her robe would be given back to her and she would be told to stay in the squad. A few days would pass and Captain Yami and Magma would go on their quote-unquote mission when we all know it's just gambling. They would lose much like in Canon and they would make their way back to the base. Asta and Noelle would be walking around through the hideout as they would run across a naked Captain Yami and Magma. Asta would cover Noelle's eyes as he would ask exactly what happened to them. Yami would laugh as he would tell them to meet him in the main quarters in just a few minutes. There, Yami would explain that he was sending Noelle and Asta to Saucy Village along with Magma to get rid of some boars. Noelle not being able to control her magic, she would hitch a ride with Magma, and Asta would just use a broomstick. Eventually they would get there, and within just minutes of them getting there, pretty much all of the boars were dead, due to Asta taking them out with his swords or his light magic. But when they actually made it back to the village, they seen it was surrounded by mist. Asta would think quickly as he would summon his demon dweller sword, stabbing the mist, absorbing all of it around the village into his demon dweller sword. All three of them would rush into the village, and just in time as Asta would see some icicles about to fall on the villagers. As he would convert the mist mana that he absorbed seconds ago into pure mana, and he would shoot it in one large beam toward all the icicles, destroying them. Asta would then summon a secondary demon dweller sword to his hand as he would jump in front of the group of villagers, protecting them. As he would begin to cut through spells, stopping them from getting past him and hitting the villagers. Magma would try to step in, but he would get blasted back by an ice glacier, sending him into the group of villagers. But much like in Canon, Noelle would be pushed to her limit, and she would unlock a new spell, Sea Dragon's Lair, as a huge bubble of water would surround her, the group of villagers, and Magna. Asta, seeing this, would know that no one was in danger of getting hit by anything at this point. As then Asta would toss both of his swords toward the group of mages. As then a whole bunch of light swords would begin to surround the two demon dweller swords, and they begin to multiply many times over. As then Asta would say, "Bright spiraling blades." As the group of mages were hit by a flurry of light swords, they were all injured and were unable to fight. They were then all captured, but much like in Canon, they killed themselves immediately. But one was able to get away, and that one went on to delay information about Asta to the Master. But much like in Canon, Nero, who is here, I just haven't been giving her attention, but she would get the magic stone like she did in Canon. But upon the three finishing up the mission and going back to the base, they found out that they got a star. And they were officially at negative 30 stars, only 100 away from the top squad, the Golden Dawn. A few days would pass by, and then it would be payday and everyone would get a day off. Vanessa would ask Asta what he was going to do with his money, and he would simply reply with he was going to save it up. Vanessa would then tell Noelle that she could help her find something to control her magic. and then she would propose the idea that Asta tag along with it too while they went into town. Asta was kind of bored, so he didn't decline and he just went along with them. Things would pretty much go to canon and they would wind up in like the black marketplace. And while Noelle and Vanessa were looking for something to help Noelle control her magic, Asta would wander off into the gambling section, as he would watch Magma get his ass kicked in a game of poker. But eventually he would get bored and he would make his way out of the gambling section. But as he was making his way out of the gambling section, he would hear some old lady yell out, "Thief, thief, he stole my money." As he would look behind him and he would see some guy about to run past him holding a big bag of money. Asta, not really knowing what to do, he would simply put his foot out, tripping the man. Asta would then reach down, taking the bag of money back from the man as he would walk back over to the old lady. He would look at her oddly, signifying that something was off with this old lady. He would then stoop down to her level, handing the money back as he would say, "It's a pretty nice disguise." As then he would leave the Wizard King and he would meet up with Vanessa and Noelle, and they would leave. A few days would go by and Captain Yami would come back through Finrod's portal, and he would explain that a dungeon was discovered. Yami went on to say that he was going to send Noelle and Luck and also Asta since the Wizard King personally wanted to send him. So Finrod would make a portal for the three and he would drop them off nearby the entrance of the dungeon. Just as in canon, they would all make their way into the dungeon. Upon making it into the dungeon, Asta would think in his head that this place was chocked full of mana. As then Asta would lose himself in his thoughts, but he would be broken out of this by Luck stepping onto a trap. As then Asta would summon a Demon Dweller Sword, absorbing the magic. Asta's Demon Dweller Sword is just essentially anti-magic, but instead of deleting magic, it absorbs it and sends it back out. Asta would be forced to do this a few more times because Luck would not stop stepping on traps before Asta would yell at him to stop being a dumbass. But Asta's words would be ignored by Luck as he would sense someone strong in the dungeon. Luck would then create his lightning boots as he would boost off into the dungeon looking for this person. As then Noelle and Asta would group up and they would be forced to navigate the dungeon by themselves. But much like in canon, Noelle would be flustered and wouldn't be paying attention and she would step on a trap. This would release a plant-based vine monster who would capture her, but Asta would point the Demon Dweller Sword, which had a lot of stored up mana in it, and he would fire, completely disintegrating the monster, freeing Noelle, and also destroying a large majority of the area which the vine monster was in, shaking the entire dungeon. After doing this, he would look over his shoulder as he would sense a very familiar mana signature. That's where he would see Klaus, Yuno, and Mimosa. As then the two groups would meet up and Asta and Yuno would begin to talk to each other, asking what they were doing on the same mission. As then Klaus would intervene and say that Yuno shouldn't stoop so low to interact with a member of the Black Bulls. But Asta wouldn't get pissed off like he did in canon, he would just chuckle and say it appears I made the right decision not joining that squad. As then this would piss off Klaus and he would say like the Black Bulls are any better. As then Klaus would propose a challenge, whoever made it to the vault first got to take all the credit for the mission. Asta would say that that challenge was quite intriguing, but he didn't have time for it. He had to go find his so-called superior. As then the two groups would split, the Golden Dawn looking for the vault and the Black Bulls looking for Luck. Soon after their split, the Golden Dawn would already run across the vault. But much like in canon, they would get attacked by Mars, and their fight with Mars would go the exact same as it did in canon. But while that was happening, Noelle and Asta would run across Luck. He would have been captured by Lotus's black smoke. Asta would do his thing, summoning a Demon Dweller Sword and absorbing all of Lotus's black smoke, freeing Luck, and he would convert Lotus's black smoke into slashes as he would send them toward him. Lotus, upon getting hit by these slices, his chest and a shoulder would be cut open, and he would be sent pummeling to the ground, but he would get away much like in canon. And Asta only allowed Lotus to get away because his help was needed elsewhere, because he could sense Yuno's squad mates' magical power getting weaker, and Asta also sensed a very strong mana source that wasn't Yuno or his squad mates. So Asta would run off by himself, leaving Noelle and Luck behind. As Asta's grimoire would float up, he would use the spell Shining Glands. This allows one to convert their body into light and teleport if they have a good idea where they're going. So in one flash of light, Asta would disappear and he would reappear in front of Yuno, just in time to summon one of his Demon Slayer swords as he would stop Mars's blade from coming down on Yuno. As then Mars would pull off his mineral blade and he would sling it toward Asta again in hopes of hitting him, but before it could touch him, Asta would send off slashes from his Demon Slayer sword, which would actually shatter Mars's mineral sword. And they would continue to go, and as they were about to hit Mars himself, he would wrap himself in mineral armor. And because of this, Asta's air slashes would have no effect on Mars. As in, Asta would dispel his Demon Slayer sword and he would begin to levitate and fly above Mars. As in, Asta would think to himself there was no point in dragging this fight out. As Asta would put his hands out and his grimoire would begin to float in front of him. As then he would say, "Golden Rain." As the entire ceiling of the dungeon room would be filled with light spears. And all the light spears would begin to point at Mars, but Mars, in an attempt to kill Asta, he would reform his mineral sword and he would shoot it toward Asta. But at the very moment, Asta would release his spell, as all of the light spears would shoot toward Mars and they would rip through his mineral blade again. As the moment the spears touched down, they would explode. This would make the entire dungeon shake once again, and it would shatter Mars's mineral armor and he would be rendered unconscious. After this, Noelle and Luck would finally catch up with Asta, as everyone would find themselves standing in front of the vault door. And the door isn't something Asta can kind of just absorb, so you kind of need anti-magic to get past it. But Asta would just destroy it with light magic. Upon everyone getting inside the vault, they would begin to wander around and look around. Yuno would read the scroll like he did in canon, and he would actually get the wind spirit itself. As then the dungeon began to shake and it began to fall apart. It appears that all the damage that Asta inflicted on it began to catch up. But Yuno would think quick and he would form many tornadoes under everyone and he would begin to lift them off the ground. This and the help of Luck's navigation, they were able to find their way outside of the dungeon. And obviously Mars was saved just like in canon by Lotus. Both squads would be awarded some stars for successfully passing this mission, although they couldn't really recover many artifacts. A few days would pass by and Yami would tell Asta and Noelle that they had to go to the capital and give a report. On their way to the capital, though, they would run across Yuno, Klaus, and Mimosa, as Klaus would almost immediately apologize for what he said about Asta's squad. As in, him and Mimosa would thank him for saving their lives. As they would all continue to the capital, and their meeting with the Wizard King would pretty much go to canon. Except for Asta obviously wouldn't be freaking out like he was in canon. The Wizard King would thank them for their efforts, and he would also inspect Yuno's grimoire and see that he got the wind spirit sylph, yada yada yada. He would also try to get Asta to use his sword magic so he could see the sword that could absorb and multiply magic. He also asked him about his light magic, but all Asta could do was chuckle and wave his hand nervously, saying that he'd rather not use it. But much like in canon, Julius would invite the four to the ceremony that was about to be held. Asta, knowing the type of people that were going to be there, he would try to decline, but this would be shut down by Klaus, as he would say it would be an honor to go to the ceremony. Klaus, Mimosa, Asta, Yuno, and Noelle would all make their way with Julius to the ceremony. As Julius would open up the doors, Asta, with a very, very bored look on his face, would see Fuegolion and Leo, Nozel, Nebra, and Solid, Charlotte, and the other woman, I forgot her name, I will probably remember it later, and some Golden Dawn Knights who I forgot their name, I will probably remember them later. But the ceremony would commence, and things would pretty much go to canon. Everyone would get their rewards, and the banquet would start. And Asta wouldn't be being a glut, and he wouldn't be eating at all, he'd kind of just be standing off to the side. And because of this, everyone found it kind of hard to insult him, besides he was amongst everyone else, despite him being a commoner from the Black Bulls. But these insults really wouldn't reach Asta, he would kind of ignore them, as he'd be waiting for the right moment just to leave because he did not want to be here anymore. An argument would be struck up by Leo and a few of the Golden Dawn members about how Mimosa was injured in the line of duty and how Yuno was even on their squad and how they had to rely on some commoner to save them. As in, much like in canon, Solid would butt into the conversation and he would say and do what he did in canon. This would end with him dumping water on Noelle's head like in canon. I really have to stop saying the word canon. But after Solid did this, a cold chill would run up everyone's spine, as a menacing aura would begin to take over Asta, yet he would keep his same calm persona, as he would simply sigh and say in a pretty neutral, calm voice, "I told you we shouldn't have come here." As then Asta would take one step towards Solid and Noelle, but before he could take another, he would hear a loud explosion outside the window. He would turn around and take a glance, and he would see the entire kingdom on fire. He would then turn back around, and he would tell everyone that the kingdom was under attack. Everyone would band together in the middle of a room to create a strategy on what they should do, but while they were doing this, Asta would go ahead and open up the window and jump out. He would then land down at the northern district. As Asta seen, the entire northern district and probably the rest of the kingdom was flooded with these weird people. They didn't look normal though, they had corroded and cracked skin, almost as if they were dead. Asta would summon a demon dweller sword to his hand and see with blitz sword slicing one of the people in half. But it still wasn't dead, it was still trying to attack the people. As then Asta got a better feel for it and he seen that they were dead people, they were just corpses chocked full of mana to keep them going. Asta would then just stab it in the back with his demon dweller sword, absorbing all of the magic out of it as it would stop moving. Asta would then continue doing this. He would summon waves upon waves of demon dweller swords, sending them toward the undead. And upon the demon dweller swords stabbing into the undead, they would absorb all the magic out of them, leaving them as nothing more than corpses. And Asta, by doing this, he would pretty much wipe out all the undead that were in the northern district. As then he would cut a corner and he would see a little girl about to be attacked by more undead. Asta would summon more demon dweller swords, sending them toward the undead as they would stab into them, absorbing all their magic as the undead would fall to the ground. And upon him coming completely around the corner, there is where he would see Rades. I definitely pronounced that wrong. Rades, seeing Asta take out his undead, he would then summon Jeremy. But Jeremy almost immediately would catch a demon dweller sword to the chest, absorbing all of his magic as he would begin to disintegrate. As then Asta would shoot a light spear toward Rades, stabbing him in the shoulder, sending him to the ground. As seconds later, Leo, Fuegoleon, and Noel would show up, much like in canon. Rades would be captured, and Fuegoleon would be trying to get answers out of him. While this was happening, and due to Rades' capture, all the other undead were completely eliminated. Once the group of magic knights eliminated all the undead, they would all group up in individual spots. And unknowingly to them, black portals would open up under them, sucking them in. All the magic knights, except for Yuno and Asta's group, would be teleported to some place far away from the kingdom. And while this was happening, Fuegoleon was still trying to get answers out of Rades. And when no one was paying attention, Fuegoleon was also sucked into a black portal. And here, he would fight Patri, who was posing as Licht, and in the process, he would lose his arm, and Patri would take his pendant, which was actually a magic stone. Yuno would still have his same fight that he had in canon, and Fuegoleon, barely left alive, would come out of a portal, landing at Asta's feet. Asta would see that Fuegoleon was losing a lot of blood, and he really didn't know what to do. He didn't have any recovery spells. But in a panic, his grimoire would open, and it would flip to an empty page, as a new spell would be written in it. As then he would use this spell, light magic, healing light particles. Asta would inflict this on what was left of Fuegoleon's arm, stopping the bleeding. As then he would shoot a light beam at the pile of bodies to his left because he knew that there was somebody in there. As then Voltos would jump from the pile of bodies onto a rooftop, nearly dodging the light beam. As then he would open up portals around Leo, Asta, Noel, and Fuegoleon. And out came even more Eye of the Midnight Sun members. Asta would stand up, being more serious than he's ever been before, as he would summon one demon destroyer sword and one demon dweller sword ready to fight all of them at once. But within an instant, all the magic knights that got teleported just minutes ago would reappear. Voltos, seeing that they were clearly outmatched, he would summon portals around all of the Eye of the Midnight Sun members, taking them. And much like in canon, they would appear back at the hideout, going inside, where they would be met by Julius. They would get handled and captured by Julius until Bootleg Licht, aka Patri, would show up and save all of them except for one. And this one, along with the one that Yuno beat, would be held captive for questioning. Fuegoleon would be admitted to the hospital for rehabilitation since he just lost his arm. And yeah, things would pretty much unfold just like in canon. And that is going to bring part 1 to this What If to an end. Part 2 might be coming next week or maybe even this week. But I just really wanted to get really deep into it so I didn't have to spend that many parts on this What If. Because if I was doing this normally, it would have took me like 3 parts just to get past the dungeon arc. But yeah, I'm ending it right here so I can get this video out since I haven't uploaded in like a week. I was planning on making it like an hour, but to be honest, I could like probably put the entire series into an hour vid. Which I'm not really feeling up to do because that will take a long time. But who knows, after I get done with my Black Clover rewatch, I might do a Black Clover movie. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I will be putting out part 2. Everything is linked in the description below, and bye guys.